Hello everyone, hope you are all well. In today's video we are exploring common historical misconceptions that have become popular beliefs. The first misconception on our list is Christopher Columbus and the flat earth. Christopher Columbus, contrary to popular belief, didn't set sail to give a geography lesson to the Flat Earth Society. By Columbus's time, educated people in Europe were already aware that the earth was a sphere. This knowledge dates back to ancient Greek scholars like Eratosthenes, who had not only asserted that the earth was round, but had also calculated its circumference with remarkable accuracy. Let that sink in for a minute. People knew the earth was spherical in the year 200 BC, and some still dispute that fact today. I think we need to draw a line under this and move on. But anyhow, Columbus's primary goal was to find a direct maritime route to Asia for trade purposes, especially to India and China. He thought he could achieve this by sailing westward, but he significantly underestimated the size of the earth and distance to Asia. He should have read more of Eratosthenes' work. Instead of reaching Asia, Columbus landed in what is now known as the Bahamas in the Caribbean. The flat earth misconception likely became polarized due to the misunderstanding of medieval beliefs and the conflation of Columbus's voyage with the debunking of archaic views. In reality, Columbus was not challenging the established shape of the earth, he was challenging the accepted distance to Asia. Next up, Lady Godiva's naked horsey ride. Lady Godiva, an 11th century noblewoman, is famously said to have ridden au naturel through the streets of Coventry, England, to protest the oppressive taxation imposed by her husband, Leofric, Earl of Mercia. However, historical evidence supporting this narrative is extremely scant. The early accounts of Lady Godiva's life made no mention of her galloping through the streets in her birthday suit. It was only around 2 centuries later that this part of the story appears in historical records. Many scholars believe the story was likely a myth or allegory, possibly invented to highlight her compassion for the people and to lend some drama to local history. Even the term peeping Tom, associated with someone who disobeyed the command to avert their eyes from Lady Godiva, has dubious origins. There is no substantial evidence to support that such an individual ever existed during the time Lady Godiva was said to have lived. I am certain voyeurs existed back then, even if they weren't named Tom. If someone was really keen on sneaking a peek at Lady Godiva in the raw, they'd probably have to lurk around her bedroom window, not in the public streets. While Lady Godiva was known for her piety and charitable acts, the sensational narrative of her protesting taxes in the Altogether is widely considered to be a legend rather than a historical fact. Next, Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France during the late 18th century, is often attributed with the phrase, "let them eat cake," as a response to hearing that the French subjects were suffering due to widespread famine and could not afford even bread. This was during the time when her body and head were still attached to each other, obviously. However, there is no definitive evidence that Marie Antoinette ever uttered this phrase. The quote was first attributed to an unnamed great princess in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions, which was written when Marie Antoinette was only 13 years old and not yet in France. Furthermore, none of the contemporaneous records of the French Revolution attribute the phrase to her. Looks like the catchphrase was more of a smear campaign, an 18th century fake news moment, if you will. Just a way to make the out-of-touch royal seem even more, well, out of touch. Therefore, it's highly unlikely that Marie Antoinette ever said, "let them eat cake." And the phrase should not be taken as a historical fact. Now we have Benjamin Franklin discovering electricity. The common held belief that Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity is an oversimplification of his actual contribution. In other words, it's not true. Franklin did not discover electricity. It was a natural phenomenon that had been observed and written about for centuries. What Franklin did accomplish was the demonstration that lightning was a form of electricity through his famous kite experiment. His work was more about understanding the properties and behaviour of electricity, and it paved the way for further scientific exploration. Researchers like Michael Faraday and Nikola Tesla would later build upon this foundational knowledge to make the advancements in the fields of electromagnetism and electrical engineering. So while Franklin's work was undeniably important, attributing the discovery of electricity to him alone was not accurate. Next we have Machiavelli advocating ruthless behaviour. Niccolò Machiavelli is often cited as advocating ruthless, manipulative behaviour through his seminal work, The Prince. However, this is a misunderstanding of his intent. He wasn't passing out instruction manuals for aspiring despots at a tyrant's convention. Machiavelli was describing the political landscape of the time and advising rulers on how to maintain power, but he wasn't necessarily endorsing these methods. Some scholars even argued that The Prince was a satirical work, meant to expose the brutal realities of leadership rather than to provide a how-to guide. The point is, saying Machiavelli advocated for ruthless behaviour is like saying Shakespeare promoted teen suicide through Romeo and Juliet. So while the term Machiavellian has come to be associated with deceit and manipulation, this was not Machiavelli's original intent. The Dark Ages were not dark. The term Dark Ages is a historical misnomer that suggests Europe was in a period of cultural stagnation and ignorance following the fall of the Roman Empire. Despite the name, this era wasn't a never-ending misery fest. Sure, nobody could get decent spaghetti for a while, but was it all doom and gloom? No. The era, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 14th century, was a time of significant achievements in various fields. Though it was a period of social upheaval and there was setbacks, such as loss of some classical knowledge, it was also a time of innovation. Architectural advances like the Gothic cathedral emerged, and important work in fields like astronomy, philosophy and medicine continued, particularly during the Islamic Golden Age. The term Dark Ages is thus misleading. The period was one of both continuity and change, and it set the stage for the Renaissance. The next one we have is the apple falling on Newton's head. The popular story that an apple fell on Isaac Newton's head, like some real-life cartoon, leading to his groundbreaking understanding of gravity, is more of a simplified tale than a historical fact. While it is true that Newton made revolutionary contributions to physics, especially with his laws of motion and universal gravitation, the apple incident didn't exactly happen as commonly depicted. Newton himself recounted that the observation of the apple falling from the tree in his mother's garden led him to ponder why it fell straight down rather than at an angle or upwards. This curiosity guided him into an extensive study of motion and gravitation. But there is no credible evidence to suggest the apple even hit him. The narrative likely became a symbolic way to explain complex scientific theories to the general public. So before you go sitting under fruit trees waiting for scientific inspiration or a concussion, remember that Newton's revelation came from years of turning complex numbers into even more complex theories, not from a Granny Smith doing a kamikaze act. The last misconception we have for you today is that Henry VIII had 6 wives. Henry VIII, the King of England from 1509 to 1547, is often remembered for having 6 wives. However, according to the Church of England, only 3 of these marriages were considered legitimate. Henry's first marriage was to Catherine of Aragon, which he later sought to annul. His second marriage to Anne Boleyn also ended in annulment and her execution. Following these, he married Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and finally Catherine Parr. We all know the catchy phrase, divorce, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, to remember the unfortunate fates of all his spouse. However, this phrase doesn't hold up entirely when considering the Church of England's viewpoint. According to the Church, only his marriage to Jane Seymour, Catherine Howard, and his final marriage to Catherine Parr were legitimate. All other marriages were annulled, making these wives legally non-existent in the eyes of the Church, and therefore the marriages never took place. I hope you enjoyed this look at historical events that are not quite as we have been led to believe. Tune in next time for more historical tidbits.